So far in this series of videos, we've created an application with one screen where we can enter a plant, a description, and a date planted. But what we really want to do is to collect events that occur on this specimen of a plant. When we water it, maybe when we transplanted it, when we fertilized it, other things like that. And we also want to keep the app relatively simple. So one way that we can do that is to keep a master view of the plant here and then have the details of events on another screen. And the way we can do that in Android is with an activity with multiple fragments. So if you see this black rounded corner box here, that essentially represents our activity. And right now we have a fragment that's describing a specific specimen of a plant. What we want to do is we want to be able to pull that fragment away and then bring a new fragment in. And the new fragment is going to allow us to talk about events that have occurred to this specimen. Now, the really nice thing about modern Android with model view model is that this view model up here, which has served the data down to our fragment so far, we can continue to use it with this activity and with the different fragments that it swaps in and out. So there are several steps to this journey. In this video, we're going to look at how to make just the fragment that's going to capture our events for our specimen. A couple things we'll need to do. First of all, we're going to want to make a DTO that represents the data we're going to collect from this fragment. Secondly, we need to make the fragment itself. Let's start with the DTO. So I right-click and I choose New Kotlin File Class. Let's call this one Event. And we will make it a class and choose OK. We'll make this a data class. We know that's an easy way to essentially represent a DTO, so we need to give it a constructor. Let's say var type string, and we'll give each of these defaults. So string equals double quote. By giving it a default, that means that we can invoke this constructor with a variable number of parameters, anywhere from 0 to all of the possible parameters. Let's say var date :string equals double quote. Now I feel like I should use java.util.date here, but really I'm just persisting this to Firebase Cloud Firestore. And I'm going to put an input mask on the text view that the user will see. So we're going to control input that way, not too worried about making it an actual Java date right now. So we'll default that to blank. Var quantity. So quantity would be how much water, how much fertilizer. Let's make this a double, and let's make it a nullable double, but we'll go ahead and give it a default value of 0.0. And then let's say var units, and we'll call that a string. And then again, initialize that to double quote. Units would go along with quantity, so we might have quantity 4 units gallons, something like that, or quantity 3 units cups, something like that. So again, we're describing an event that's going to happen to this specimen. Finally, var description :string equals, and then double quote. So description is just free text that a user can enter. So you see here we've created an event type. Now with that, let's take a look and see how we can attach this to a specimen. We already have our specimen DTO, and we see that we have several things going on in the specimen DTO that we've created already. Let's add this as another parameter. Once again, we'll create it as a constructor parameter with a default. What's nice about that is, because we're giving it a default value, all of our existing calls to this constructor will still work, even if it doesn't include this final parameter. So let's say events, and then of type array list, and event, just like so, and we will give it a default of array list event. Open and close paren to indicate that we are calling a constructor. And I missed the var, didn't I? So var, I knew I missed something. So var events, just like so. In other words, we're saying that a specimen can belong to a plant, and then a specimen can have events. So we plant the specimen at one point, we water it, we fertilize it, we water it again. Maybe we trim it or prune it. Maybe we take fruit from it. These are all events that can happen to one specimen. And we indicate that we can have multiple events for one specimen because the array list by default is a collection. I'm happy with our data model now, so let's go ahead and create the fragment that's going to represent this visually. So I right-click on the package where my fragments are. I scroll down and I choose Fragment, and you see there are several different options here. I'm going to choose Fragment with View Model with one footnote. That's going to assume that I want to create a new view model. What I really want to do is reuse the main view model that we've used throughout this series of lectures. But that's okay, we can refactor into that. So we'll call this event fragment. And notice that it's going to create a layout for us. It's also going to create this view model, but as I say, we'll delete that and we'll use our main view model. And then source language Kotlin, that's fine for us. Add to our source code repository. So we take a look, it's put a little bit of plumbing automatically into our event fragment. And what I want to take a look at now is the layout itself. This is where we'll spend a little more time making everything look good so that we can populate one of our events. I've put this in distraction-free mode so we can see it in high definition. I'm going to start by deleting the component that's already there, and I'm also going to convert our layout to a constraint layout from a frame layout. Now, since I've done that, it makes sense to change the name of the layout as well, so we'll call it event constraint layout. Now let's add some components. We'll start with an autocomplete text view to represent the type. I love autocomplete text views because they're very user-friendly. We'll go ahead and drag the constraints left and right. Zoom up a little bit. There we go. And go ahead and add a constraint to the top as well. To make the most use of our width, I'm going to change this to match constraint. You see that's going to take us, take the autocomplete text view all the way left and right. Give it a reasonable name. ACT event type will work. Text we're going to take out of there because that is the text that the user would type in. But instead we're going to use a hint. I like hints because it essentially puts a label inside of the component, and also that label goes away as soon as the user starts typing. So hint, add a new resource, we'll add it to our strings XML, we'll call this event type, and resource value event type. Since this is in strings.xml in the values folder, it's going to be easy to swap this out. If we want to support another language, we simply use another XML file. Okay, enough on that though. So we start with event type. Now let's do quantity, and for quantity we'll do a number. So this is a similar widget. It's a text widget. It's just one that has a mask on it for numbers. Let's draw this one right underneath. We'll give it a constraint to be right underneath the event type autocomplete that we just started. There we go. And then once again drag left and right. After this I'm not going to explain that part. I'll simply fast forward it to speed up the time that our video is taking. So, okay, we'll call this one EDT quantity. And once again, we'll give it a hint. Now for units, let's use autocomplete text view one more time. That will be something like gallons, ounces, cups, or something of that nature. So we want to keep somewhat standard there, but then also let the user choose something unique if the user wants to. So we'll say ACT units. Take away the text. For hint, unit, units, and then we'll say units, gallons, cups, etc. Just like so. Remember, the value is what the user is going to see, kind of like a hint, exactly what it's meant for. Next, date. I mentioned that we'll use the date mask for a date. We're not going to bother storing it in a date Java type, though. Just one less transformation we have to make at this time. We can do some more transformations on that later if we wish. Okay, so we'll call this EDT date. Let's say event date. And we'll give it the hint event date. Just a few more to go. We'll say description. It just so happens we already have a string resource for description. That's one we used in a prior screen. So we don't need to create a new string resource. We're going to reuse that same word description. Finally, let's add an image button. Now this image button is going to save our event, and luckily we already have a disk image to represent save. Again, something we put on a prior screen. So we choose OK, and we get our button. Let's call this btn save event. And simply verify that all of our other components have names that are going to make sense, and then we're going to choose save. So let's remember btn save event, and we will return to our event fragment. So this is the fragment that we started with, a little boilerplate stuff here. We're going to change a few things eventually, not right now, but we're eventually going to change the view model behind the scenes. For the moment, let's just make use of that button that we added. So remove the to-do, and I'm going to say btn save event. And notice it wants to do an import for me here. So yeah, okay, that's good. It gives us a synthetic import, probably one of my favorite things about Kotlin, because with the synthetic imports, we can refer to the components that are on our layout without doing find view by ID. Makes our life a lot easier there. So btn save event dot set on click listener, and we'll go ahead and define an inline click listener. We're simply going to make a new function called save event, just like so, and create function, and there we go. So we're simply associating this save event function with that button click. Now, let's go ahead and create a new event object. Var event equals event, just like so. Now, we have to be careful with the import, and I realize event now probably wasn't a good idea, just because there's so many different types of events. That's kind of an ambiguous word. We want the event that we created, which is here in this package that ends with DTO. So be careful, make sure that you import the right event if you're following along with me. Now, that's okay. Notice that we don't have to pass any parameters to the constructor because, sure enough, we gave default values to each of them. So we can assign them individually if we want. We can, as a matter of fact, I'll tell you what, we can do a with. Why don't we just do a with event? We know in a with block we can refer to the properties of the event as if they're local within this block. In other words, I can simply say description equals edt description dot get text, or text rather, dot toString. And since I've used a with block, this description is going to be relative to this event variable right here. So it's essentially saying event.description equals edt description dot text dot toString. So event is the object we're populating. edt description is the component in which the user added some information. So next is quantity equals edt quantity dot text dot toString. Now it redlines because quantity is a number and edt quantity text dot toString is a string. So we need to do a bit of parsing here. We see that's a double. So what we can do is simply say .toDouble, which is what's called an extension function in Kotlin because it's an extension of string type. We should wrap this in an if test as well and make sure that edt_quantity.text.toString has some characters in it. Let me do a bit of refactoring here, because if not, we might get a parse issue there. So let's say var quantity string equals like so, and then we'll say if quantity string length greater than 0, make sure there's something in there, then we'll go ahead and parse. I'm not terribly worried about the contents, just because we already put that mask on it to ensure that we're only entering numbers. So as long as the length is greater than 0, I'm happy that we have something. There are other ways to do it. We could do an isEmpty and stuff like that, but this is a quick and dirty way to take care of that. Okay, next we have units. Units equals, remember that one was an ACT units, that was an autocomplete, so we'll say ACT units dot text dot toString, and then we had, let's see, we had description units, we had type, so type equals ACT type, event type dot text dot toString, and we also had date, date equals EDT date, EDT event date actually, edt event date dot text, and once again dot toString, like so. So a little bit out of order. I'll tell you what, I'll go ahead and reorder this a little bit so it matches what's on our user interface, but really order doesn't matter. What we're doing is we're simply taking that stuff from the layout and we're putting it into an object, and then we can add that object to a collection if we wish. Now we're going to need to show this fragment at some point, and we know the activity is the thing that controls or can control when we're showing different fragments. So let's go to the main activity. And in a previous video, I put up some swipe event handlers. Let's take a look at the onSwipe right here, and let's do a bit of magic in here. Now we scroll up and we're going to use an example from above. You see, when we first start the activity, it sets it uses our main fragment, it instantiates that essentially, and it shows that. So I'm going to copy some logic from that, and I'm going to paste it down here on the onSwipe right. Not worried about the saved instance state. Let's just simplify things a little bit. Let's use the support fragment manager. So what that's doing is saying, I want to put a fragment into the view that the user can see. The only thing is, instead of main fragment, we're going to change this to event fragment, which is the fragment that we've just created. Need to do a little import magic. Now I've started the application. I realize now that I put it under swipe right to get to our event screen, and swipe left might have made more sense. So nonetheless, I'll go ahead and swipe, and we see that sure enough, when I swipe, it's loading up the new fragment that we've just created. So let's say event type, water, quantity 1, units, we say gallons, and notice as I start typing, those hints go away. Really like how that works. It helps so we don't have to have a label for every component on the screen. Date, we'll go ahead and say 03/22/2020. Description, watered my plant. Now we don't have this wired up to a specimen just yet. Not to worry, we'll do that in our next video. But let's just make sure that we're collecting this data. So I press on the save, and I see sure enough we are creating an event, and then we're using our with operator. So right now we simply have an empty object. Nothing in there, type nothing, date nothing, quantity nothing, units nothing, description nothing. Now let's walk through and watch it get populated. So we start by getting our type from the screen, and our type is water, but more importantly, I mouse over this variable event that contains the event object, and you notice the type is water is now populated. Description, let's mouse over event one more time, and we see that now we have description watered my plant. So as we're working through this with block, we are populating the object that we created up here on line number 38. And okay, quantity string, what's in quantity? It's the number 1. 1 has a length greater than 0. The physical character 1 is greater than 0. So we parse that to a double. We save it in the quantity attribute. Take a look now, quantity is populated. Units I think we said is gallons. So we see units as gallons. And finally the date we're populating as well. And now we have a fully populated event object, type water, date 3/22/2020, gallons 1.0, or quantity 1.0, units gallons, and description watered my plant. So I'll choose F9 and let this continue. Now at this point we can continue to accumulate events, and we want to associate those events with our specimen. For that, we'll need this concept of an activity that uses two fragments and uses the same view model. Not to worry, we'll pick up with that in our next video. So I hope this video has been helpful. I look forward to reading your comments. Thank you.